Okay, everyone, we'll get started again. Now I would like to introduce Brenda Haskell, Region Forest Specialist with the Forest Marketing and Utilization Program at the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, Forest Resources Division. Brenda will be moderating the Opportunities and Barriers portion of the summit. Take it away, Brenda.
Thank you, Donna. It's been great having you be our moderator this morning. You've done just a fantastic job. This is a challenge. If anyone that is joining us today has never been a key component participant in this part of a webinar process, it is a challenge. So we're going to have a discussion as fluidly as possible about the opportunities and barriers to mass timber specifically related to Michigan. We may touch on some other areas in terms of those opportunities and barriers and how they present themselves throughout not just our nation but worldwide. We are going to try to do our best to hone in on those opportunities and barriers that are specific to the state of Michigan. We have 4 people that are going to join us, and gentlemen, if you could turn on your webcams, I'll get you introduced. Jim Smith, who joined us previously, is part of the American Wood Council staff, joining them in 2014 as the Midwest Regional Manager, who is a resource for code officials in the states of North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Thank you, Jim. George Berghorn, who is an Assistant Professor of Construction Management in the School of Planning, Design, Construction at Michigan State University and an Adjunct Assistant Professor in the MSU Department of Forestry. Next up, and we are doing a little bit of a short intro for everyone because for those of you that are joining us, you will have seen all of these people before. Next up, Bill Bofeisel has more than 12 years of construction management and currently serves as the project manager for Granger Construction. He is responsible for total project management, negotiating subcontracts, and providing day-to-day communication with the project team for Granger. Next, last but not least, Kevin Marshall, who is the Senior Associate at Integrated Design Solutions. Kevin is serving as project architect for the STEM teaching facility project at Michigan State University. Kevin, I think you've been on camera most of this morning at this point.
Quite a bit, yeah.
Indeed, indeed. All right, so if everyone besides Jim could go ahead and shut their cameras back off. Jim's going to lead us off with just a couple of short slides as we launch into the discussion on opportunities and barriers. So there you are, Jim, you're ready to go.
All right, thanks for having me. I'm like I was introduced. I'm with the American Wood Council. My ability to focus this directly on Michigan is probably going to be a little bit less than that of the other panelists. We work, American Wood Council is working primarily in the area of codes nationally. Although I'm, in the Midwest region, we're working on the standards that architects and engineers use for the design and construction, and contractors as well, for the design and construction of projects. So next slide. Some of the barriers, that we feel, and I think has been probably the type of barrier that's been the biggest for almost anyone working to talk about the increased use of mass timber is the building codes. In this case, in Michigan, you're dealing with the IBC. The Michigan Building Code is based on the 2015 edition of the IBC, and NFPA 1 and 101, which is what the fire folks are using. That's the fire code. They're using the 2012 editions. So, the fact that those older codes are in place is oftentimes one of the biggest barriers. So we've worked very hard. We were able to work to get the tall mass timber improvements, basically the inclusion of the increased sizes, whether it be for height and area, that'll help make the mass timber projects a lot more economical than they have been in the past. I think from my previous presentation, some of you that were involved might remember that we were dealing with a like up to an 18-story building in the 2021 edition of the code. So that's one of the main barriers that's been brought up to us. And of course, there's the material supply and manufacturing capabilities. There's I think that was just talked on in the session preceding ours. So that's another important factor that can create some problems for those that want to use mass timber. There can tend to be a material bias within code enforcement agencies. Now, again, that isn't necessarily specific to Michigan, and I don't know that Michigan has any inherent legislative provisions included within the background of their building codes to prevent or to prevent the use of other materials instead of wood products. But there has been a bias in the past over wood products based on their combustibility and folks' familiarity with light frame construction as opposed to mass timber. So again, that's another barrier. Dealing with code official or the agencies that might be reluctant to allow the use of the alternative means process. Until such time as those newer editions of the code are brought into play and adopted by, in this case, by the state of Michigan, the only alternative you have is the alternative means process. And that's the one, if you start having too many questions about why would anyone want to proceed and move along with an alternative means, that's an extra barrier that the architects, engineers, developers that want to use mass timber, that they have to butt up against. So that's not necessarily that significant a problem here in Michigan. They've done I think a really good job in keeping current with the code cycles. There's another barrier, lack of experience with mass timber products. There's a lot of research going on that's behind the latest code provisions, and folks that aren't really aware of that, they might their comfort level, of course, is not going to be the same as the materials that they've been using on their other projects. Opportunities, just as with Wisconsin and Minnesota, there are a lot of forests to help step forward. I think others in this group, and as you saw earlier this morning with Jean-Luc's presentation, there's a lot of product available when you start thinking about the size and the extent of the forests that exist within Upper Michigan and Michigan proper. Another opportunity, increased knowledge of the green building importance. Although it's not as big right now as exists over in Europe, there's been some significant moves in that respect. So understanding the awareness, how this product sits within the sustainability and its ability to be not necessarily remanufactured, but the forest growth is really significant in those regards. And then another opportunity, which may also be considered a barrier, is the reduction in construction time and the reduction in skilled labor. I bring that up as it may be potentially being a barrier because depending upon the state or the municipality where the project is to be considered, you could have groups, activities where they're not necessarily interested in having less labor on a job. They're more interested in having more skilled labor on a job, which is always good for the economy. So that's another of the what I think is potentially an opportunity is as folks become more knowledgeable of the product and how it works together, as the other panelists will be able to speak more on. folks are going to get a lot more comfortable with it, and the speed of construction is going to be a significant factor. I think I'm probably even over my 3 minutes, but I hope this gets us a good start, gets the juices flowing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jim. Reminder to everyone that's in the audience, any questions or comments or thoughts that you have on barriers and opportunities to mass timber, please put them into the chat box. We do have someone that's going to pull those questions off, and then I'll be able to ask our speakers as they come through. So Jim, if you want to go ahead and turn your camera off, we're going to have George step in. And we're going to turn it over to you, George.
All right, thanks, Brenda. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here again with you. I just want to step you through now. If Jim presented maybe more of a regional or national approach to some of these barriers and opportunities, I want to pick up on that and start to bring us maybe a little more in line with some issues that are specific to Michigan, although I've got a few issues that also exist beyond the borders of our state as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So we'll start with opportunities, and we can go to the next. So in a general sense, not just here in Michigan, but as you heard this morning in the discussion about the multiple levels of coordination that are required to execute a successful mass timber project, the more we step into mass timber, the more our architecture, engineering, and construction industry also begins to implement more integrated project delivery models like design assist, design build, and integrated project delivery. Delivery modes that really do contractually require a greater degree of integration among parties, delivery modes that we've seen growing in their use over the last several years, although there are still some barriers to using particularly design build and IPD, but we think we would see some of those barriers start to break down as we move into more implementation of mass timber. We can go to the next, please. I think one of the things that maybe has been highlighted throughout the last 3 weeks about the MSU project is that higher education projects occupy a unique position, particularly in Michigan, because of the delegated building authority that's given to the boards of trustees of universities in the state of Michigan. And while MSU and most other higher ed institutions across the state endeavor to be good neighbors with their cities or towns where the school is located and work hand in hand with their local and state building authorities, there is some unique opportunity that exists when you have primary building office authority vested in the Board of Trustees of the university. It allows us to think a little differently about the way we execute projects, and it allows educational institutions to bring research and practice together, as you've seen over the last couple of weeks, specifically on this project. Next, please. As we start thinking about the next set of projects that are going to take place in Michigan, one big opportunity would be if we can start to generate clusters of projects leveraging local and regional owners and the experience of the assembled AEC community in those regions to start thinking about the development of mass timber project clusters. So if you think about the impact that the STEM building has on our industry in terms of serving as a learning laboratory and a practice laboratory for building owners and folks in industry, and now think of what the multiplicative effect would be if the Lansing region or mid-Michigan region had 3 or 4 or 5 different building types, different uses, all built of mass timber, how that might even further some of the industry and public education and outreach goals of this work. Next, please. That then leads directly into this notion of, what if we could have some kind of a virtual tour of these clusters or driving tours of these clusters to really start to engage people on the ground where these projects are located. Next, please. We talked, I believe it was in my session last week, I mentioned, what's been going on with wood prices, and while wood prices have come down in the last week, they're still above $900 per thousand at a national level, and this is one of the challenges with commodity priced raw materials, that we're just sort of one tariff or another hurricane or another shutdown away from some concerns about what pricing might look like. And so there's an opportunity to embrace salvaged and urban lumber, alternate sources of material to help dampen some of those wild swings that we're seeing in commodity prices. And just as a side note, just as we see random length lumber prices coming down to just around 900 per thousand board feet this week, there's 2 more named storms brewing, I believe both in the Atlantic. So again, we could be just another hurricane away from seeing prices swing back the other way. Next slide, please. I do want to highlight the fact that we have opportunities that are centered around some of the work we do at MSU, around outreach research, and a pending student competition in the 2021 to 2022 school year. And so for those of you that are participating in this event, if you want to learn more or be part of this activity at MSU, I would encourage you to reach out to me or some of the other MSU presenters or organizing committee members for this event. Next slide, please. And then this, of course, gives us an opportunity to engage the current forest products industry in diversifying their product mix as well. So we don't really have a mass timber manufacturer in the state right now. So perhaps an event like this gives us an opportunity to diversify and expand an already valuable contributor to the overall economy of the state. All right, so if we go to the next slide and click next, yep, we go to barriers. So some barriers that we have, you know, this bullet point may be presented a little more like an opportunity, but, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking to architects and engineers and general contractors, but it's really owners that have to hear this message as well, because of course it's the owners who at the conceptual stage really drive what they're looking for in a building. And while we can rely on architects, engineers, and GCs, particularly in these more collaborative project delivery modes to do some owner education, we really feel like the lack of targeted focus on owners is something that may still be holding us back a little bit. Next, please. Of course, we've talked about code. You've heard about it last week and again this week. You know, one barrier is that our code adoption cycle in Michigan, we're always about 3 years behind. So we're now looking to adopt 2018 IBC in 2020, 2021 in Michigan, which would put us another 3 years out from adopting 2021, which has the expanded mass timber provisions. So we probably ought to think about if there's serious interest in doing this in Michigan, what would it look like? What would it take to bring 2021 mass timber provisions into the 2018 IBC code update process in the state of Michigan? Next slide, or next, please. Again, we need to think about how to understand and account for cost performance and construction schedule performance in general contractor pricing and subtrade pricing. So we think there's significant opportunity in those places, but we've done one project in the state. So lack of local experience means that we still don't fully understand how to incorporate those perceived and actual benefits into pricing when pricing out mass timber versus steel or reinforced concrete alternatives. Next, please. I don't need to hit on this anymore. We just don't have mass timber manufacturing capacity in the region. And then next, please. And then finally, we don't have regional builder training. So the Chicago Carpenters, the Union Carpenters Training Center in Chicago has a mass timber training program present out there, but there's not as much of that here locally in our region, as well as not with non-union firms. So we are actually working with some industry folks on putting some external funding proposals together to look at expanding builder training and construction manager training beyond the places where that outreach has been impactful and successful, to reaching out to other groups of folks in the industry that maybe are not being reached with current efforts that are underway by Woodworks and other industry consortiums. So that kind of covers my points, and I hope that I'll get some questions from y'all, and look forward to getting those in a little bit. Thank you. Thanks, Brenda.
Thanks, George. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that as well. So next up, we're going to hear some thoughts from both the project manager with Granger, Bill. He's going to come on camera and give us his thoughts, and after him, we're going to hear from also Kevin Marshall. So Bill, you're up next if you'd like to turn on your camera and chat with us.
Thank you, Brenda. So some of the points that I'm going to talk about, I think I'm just going to reiterate some of the things that that George mentioned as well. I think to me the biggest thing is training the workforce in installation of mass timber structures. So as you've heard earlier, Chrisman Constructors, this is the first project they did, and they worked tirelessly with Nordic about how to do this right. The more that we can provide training, as George mentioned, on a regional standpoint, a local standpoint with our skilled trades, because, Michigan has a strong base of skilled trade workers. The better off we'll be with pricing and speed of construction. Another thing too that maybe we forget about is everybody that comes after the erection of the mass timber building, our mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, plumbing, our general trades contractors, so on and so forth. So how do those people interface with the timber on site? So providing more educational opportunities to those interfacing trades as well, I think will help usher in this new era of mass timber in Michigan. That's probably the biggest thing that I wanted to talk about is maybe, those are some barriers that we're dealing with right now with how new this is in Michigan. But I think those are also some opportunities that can advance our skilled trades workforce. That's probably the biggest thing. And then obviously training our general contractors as well to how to properly scope and purchase this structure and communicate with owners and engineers about the process. So I think I'm just gonna maybe turn over to Kevin, but I think most of the points that I wanted to make have been made, and just want to reinforce the labor force is probably the next biggest thing here in Michigan that we need to take a look at.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. And I just have to comment before Kevin takes us away. Bill, I just want to save you the fact I didn't try to pronounce your last name again. Have a good start to your session here, Kevin. We'll get back with you as soon as you wrap up.
Okay, great. I have the dubious distinction of going last, which means I can be really short and say what they said. But I'm going to get a little deeper. I think we're at I'll say a chicken and the egg point of view in the state of Michigan right now, where what comes first, the industry to Michigan to promote it, or does the desire for the product invite industry to show up in the state? With the case of Michigan State and the mass timber, we chose to go with this partially to spur hopeful development in the state of Michigan and help the Michigan forestry industry in the future, not necessarily now. A second item that I believe that I understand is most of the manufacturers of mass timber own their own fiber or their own timber. So it would take a substantial investment for them to come to the state and establish an operation, both from a manufacturing standpoint, but also understanding the grade of lumber that we have available and what the material strengths are for that lumber and how readily available it is. So I think those are the opportunities and barriers in the state of Michigan, where if someone wanted to jump in, I think there's certainly market for it, but they have to hedge their bets on how popular it's going to be, and that's where I kind of see it at.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, if we could have all four of you be on the screen together, we are going to start bringing in the questions. I have one loaded up and ready, it looks like. So we'll get everybody participating. Thank you all for your time this morning as well. All right, and I'm going to do my best to target this, but then if I target the wrong person, punt the ball to the next, please. The question is, how can we, all of us in this conference, help lift the burden for code education and local official training from the design and construction team so that the cost and time of education and creating evidence does not fall disproportionately on the individual project? So George, you want to start it off?
Sure, I'll jump in on this. I think, one of the things that is an advantage of having a university involved in a project like this at a bigger scale is that we can represent information from the research perspective and really provide, a bias-free, independent assessment on much of the information that's been swirling around. And I say this having worked for the forest products industry previously and now working at a university, that's just an advantageous position of being at a university, is that oftentimes it feels like if there's confusion or uncertainty about information that's being put out sort of broadly, that universities can offer some of that independent fact check type of information. So I would encourage people that are interested in lifting all of these boats, creating that rising tide that'll lift all of these boats, contact me. Work with the university. Work with our awesome industry partners who you're seeing on this call today and for the last 2 weeks to start to develop some of this outreach and educational information that can be provided more broadly with, frankly, the stamp of the university on it, which maybe I'm being a little bit of a homer, but we feel like that lends some credibility to the information because it is being presented in a more impartial way. So that, I think that would be one. Secondly would be to, in your own circles, in your own professional circles, just start to have these conversations with people that that are interested in what mass timber is. Don't be afraid to share what you know, to share some of the resources that are available about the MSU STEM project, resources that Granger and IDS and SDI have made available, just so the language and the terminology starts getting more into common usage and people start feeling more comfortable hearing about this information.
I think that's also, oh, go ahead, Jim.
No, okay. All I was going to point out is sometimes I think there's a misconception that code officials are, it's, I don't want to say ignorant, but not as well informed as perhaps other folks think they are. And in Michigan, I've done numerous presentations face-to-face. I've done webinars. With the pandemic, we've got a little bit of a unique situation going on. I'm doing a webinar for a 3-hour webinar that's going to include a lot of information. Half of that webinar is going to be about mass timber and to the Mid-Michigan Code Officials Association Thursday, so a couple days from now. The training that, and AWC, one of the things, we're a not-for-profit, similar to Woodworks, where Woodworks focuses on providing educational opportunities to the architects and engineering community. AWC provides free training to the code official groups. And that's one of my primary responsibilities, is to get that word out. And like I said, we've done a lot of presentations in Michigan. So you might find that the code officials are actually just a little bit more knowledgeable than perhaps is thought.
I think I'll reiterate that. When we started this process, even before we made the decision to necessarily go mass timber, when it was still in the thought process, we did meet with, while Michigan State University is the local authority, because it's a classroom building, it also falls under the jurisdiction of the Bureau of Fire Services. So we met with them, did a consultation, which they have a procedure for, to help bring them along the process so that we could understand and they could understand how both of us were going to be viewing the project and work with it. And since then, I believe that this was the first CLT project in the state of Michigan, and first thing that really kind of this scale to use a mass timber solution. But the next one will be a little simpler for the next university to because there'd be some familiarity, and that we wanted to work within the code, and not try to unduly push the envelope too much in order to make it too difficult for the code officials to have the comfort that this was going to be a successful project.
Thank you very much for all of your thoughts. So we have another question. We'll see how we go with this one. It's from one of our guests that's listening in today. It says they're hearing some mixed messages from presenters with respect to having mass timber manufacturing in the state of Michigan. What are the barriers to doing so, to having that manufacturer here in the state? Do any of you have any thoughts on that? George, you want to take a stab?
Put my old forest products industry hat back on for a second. I mean, first and foremost, could very well be the fact that we are a predominantly hardwood resource state. So we have significantly more hardwood lumber resource or hardwood timber resource available to us than softwood. It's not to say that we don't have a softwood resource. We certainly have some large softwood lumber producers, manufacturers in the state. But we do tend to be predominantly hardwood. And while there's research underway to look at the inclusion of hardwood lumber into manufacturing CLT and glulam up at Michigan Tech, we're not 100% there yet in terms of everyone agreeing that this is the way to sort of start producing these products. So I think that's one. Two is that I don't know that we've identified an existing company in Michigan that's real excited about the idea of making the investment, both in terms of manufacturing capacity, machining, as well as the issue of land ownership. We are a pretty decentralized forest land owning state in Michigan. We don't have a lot of large corporate landowners, or a large number of different corporate landowners, I should say. So there may be some barriers there as well, and I'm going to stop at this point because I'm running out of where I feel comfortable saying much else.
I appreciate that, George. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Well, I think the use of Michigan timber will also, it has to be investigated what the resource is capable of, to make the companies comfortable with and the designers comfortable with what strengths and material properties they can get out of the local material, because it may be different. The black spruce in Michigan may be different than that from Chibougamau, Quebec.
Very good. I would like to just offer my own perspective, as this is a big component of my job, is to work with the private sector forest industry businesses in our state. And to reiterate something that was driven home in a survey we did of some of our forest products producers, our loggers and our log truck drivers, when it comes to how do we make changes to what's currently happening with forest products and the production of those materials in the state. And it literally came down to change is hard. It is hard. We have an aging population of forest products users and producers out in the forest. Change can be hard. It is going to be a process that's going to take time. So we have more questions. Next one up. How could Governor Gretchen Whitmer's executive order in Michigan to be carbon neutral by 2050 impact mass timber construction in Michigan? What policy or other engagement should be considered to leverage mass timber as a mechanism to help achieve that goal? Ooh. Anybody?
Yeah. AWC is involved, as said earlier, AWC is involved with not just building, the building code. We deal with all the codes, and NFPA. I sit on technical committees as well. One of the ICC codes is the green, the green code. They deal with that, and but it's not that popular. And I'm not talking about just Michigan. The concept of having that type of a code in place, having a little bit more emphasis on green building, if you will. I think if that could be pushed a little bit more, maybe the governor could talk about in trying to promote including that type of a code within the suite of codes in Michigan. But again, it could potentially be a hard sell. It's not that that forefront in the collective thinking at the present time, like it is over in Europe. It's a lot different over in Europe than it is here. And to get that, to get that going, and the concepts of, carbon sequestration and maybe carbon credits, some of the
Right.
things that have been used over in Europe, they're just not here yet. But I think if that could be promoted in some way, it might help, not just Michigan, but, also Wisconsin, Minnesota. The forests there have similar properties to those of the Michigan forests. And they're not really conducive, as Jean-Luc also or basically presented. They're not necessarily the type of product that is conducive to two-by manufacturing. So the manufacturing that's taking place on the West Coast and down in Georgia, the Southern Pine activity, where they have a large resource of product that can provide the two-by material that common CLT is manufactured with. You need to see a little bit more of the science that Jean-Luc has and the research that they've done slide down a little bit, so they can get a little bit more comfortable in manufacturing with smaller pieces.
Okay. Well, we can move on to the next question. Thank you for those thoughts, Jim. That's a lot to digest when it comes to how do we continue moving towards Governor Whitmer's 2050 goal. Next question. Getting to mass timber in Michigan is complex. What is the first thread to pull? MSU and their team have built an example. What is the next important step? Kevin, any thoughts?
Well, I think, there's been I've talked with other design professionals and owners since the start of the STEM project, who have aspirations and goals, other universities in the state, that they're just getting the right project to move forward and establish it. I think, one of the drawbacks we had with the state of Michigan, the STEM project is partially state funded through the DTMB, and they have their processes for procurement that made, I think, the process a little more laborious than it needed to be. We had hoped to go out much earlier in the process for our mass timber provider and using a design assist, but the mechanism that is approved, we needed to go more of a traditional design bid build aspect. And I think that opening up the IPD, the design assist, the design build to state funded or publicly funded projects, I think would help make mass timber be a more economical solution, because you could design to its strengths right from the get-go.
One of the points that I brought up, in my little slide presentation, had to do with the code officials, and not necessarily, the boots on the ground folks that are out there inspecting or that are going to be doing the plan review, but maybe they're the administrative folks that are a level or two ahead. If there's anything that can be done to help outside, and now what I'm talking about is outside of the university process, where the universities have the ability to deal with using newer technologies and codes, like what happened with your project here. If that same interest could be brought forward to communities. I had a call, and I think Archie Landerman was involved with a project where there was interest in providing a tall mass timber, or a taller mass timber building, not necessarily in the 18 stories that we're talking about with the 2021 code, but to do that in Detroit. And it's those types of things. If folks could get a little bit more comfortable with thinking of this progressively rather than, oh, I don't know enough about it, so we're going to dissuade that type of a project. A little bit along those lines could help out a lot too.
The other thing I'm reminded of, Brenda, is back in, I think it was 2007 or 2008, a consortium of contractors through the Associated General Contractors of Michigan had approached us because, LEED had been in common usage for a few years at that point, but it really wasn't getting adopted as quickly in Michigan as it was getting adopted in some other states. And so the AGC of Michigan had approached us to look at really breaking down LEED more into contractor-specific language. So general contractors had a better idea of what doing a LEED building meant for them, sort of boots on the ground. What would they have to change in their process? And we may be getting to a point with mass timber where we need to start thinking along those lines as well. Woodworks has developed their construction management manual that's going out to focus more on the general contractor's responsibilities. And I think if we start thinking about ways to educate general contractors in a more at that boots on the ground implementation level, to say, there's things that need to change if you're going to be successful in delivering a mass timber project, and really here they are, and here's what your responsibility starts to look like on these projects. I think that would be a critical piece. I don't know if it's necessarily the first thread to pull because, again, GCs tend to receive the projects that owners wish to build. But I think I would argue that it would be sort of in that first tier of strings that need to be pulled on. Maybe it's just a little later in that first tier.
Okay. So, Bill, from your perspective, with what you've seen with Granger and the activities at the MSU facility that's being constructed, do you see anything when it comes to that next step, or any hurdles that you have witnessed that you think we could address?
I think it just adds on to what George was saying. It's contractor involvement, where it's getting to the general contracting level, but even to the subcontractors and the second tier and third tier contractors, of getting familiarity. Because what contractors tend to do, if they're not comfortable with installation or working around a product, the price tends to go up a little bit. And so getting that familiarity with mass timber, of it just being as a regular structure as we would it with steel or cast in place, getting that familiarity with that product and understanding how they interface with it will have impact on costing on projects moving forward. So I think that's a big thing is education. One, I think primary is to the owners, like we're talking about, but then and boiling that down to the GCs, the subcontractors, and suppliers, so they get familiarity with the product.
Excellent points. One thing that we wanted to point out is that here in the state of Michigan, we have a host of state agencies that are ready and willing to help pull off any, basically acquiring information that would help make it feasible for a mass timber producer, a mass timber manufacturer to come here to the state. Both MEDC, MDARD, and DNR have staff at the ready in order to provide the information that's necessary when it comes to raw material supply, the supporting incentive in order to pull all that package together. So we are fortunate here in the state to have some extremely good professionals ready. So one question coming in, it says, we discussed the need to increase understanding of the properties of Michigan lumber for mass timber. How can we do this? Is that an academic and industry collaboration? Where or how would we fund such research? So George, that might be a good one to start with you.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of what we're doing in my lab now, not with so much lumber that's on the stump, but with deconstruction lumber from homes in Michigan and urban wood that's been sourced around the state as well. It probably is an industry and academic collaboration, because there are some elements of that work that really are sort of, if you were looking purely from a business perspective, they would be pretty major loss leaders, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time characterizing lumber that may or may not have a future it being placed in one of these products. And so, we don't necessarily think about it from a research perspective that way, that it really is a loss leader, because every data point is a good data point, whether it gets us to our end goal directly or not. But of course, having industry collaborating in that work is so important, because the worst thing in an applied type of question or an applied type of field like I'm in is you get to the end of the work and then there's sort of a resounding so what, as a result of what you come up with. So having industry connection into that work is vital. So whether it's characterizing Michigan's resource on the stump, characterizing urban and salvage source lumber from Michigan, or sort of anything else in between, I think really does require that academic and industry partnership. And there's models for funding that through partnerships. There's models for funding that through the feds, through the Forest Service. We've been funded partly by Eagle, the former DEQ, through some of their recycled materials market development opportunities that they've put together. So there's opportunities out there. But if the question's coming from an industry person, we would sort of welcome more of that partnership. And if it's coming from a fellow academic, also let me know. like to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, I can add on to what George brought up about. I'm glad he brought up the federal perspective. Again, I'm located over in just a little bit north of Madison, Wisconsin, and of course, right in my backyard. And when I grew up on the east side of Madison, was Forest Products Laboratory, and I think it might have been a year and a half ago that I was asked to join the folks at Forest Products Lab when they did a walkthrough with one of the Michigan State, not state, but Michigan U.S. Legislative folks that was involved with funding, and he was really looking for ways to promote Michigan as the Michigan legislator. So there is, I think there's some ways that can take place, and bringing in the research that's going on that can go on at Forest Products Laboratory as well.
Indeed. Great point. All right, so this question it kind of summarizes a lot of what we've already talked about. It says, what resources are needed to engage and inform owners or developers more effectively to consider mass timber? And whether that be, and this is me paraphrasing if it's a combination of what can Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute do as a nonprofit agency beyond things like being a partnership to host this summit, providing an outlet and an opportunity to communicate out this process. Are there other things we should be considering?
Well, I think it's right now in the architectural industry, I think it's a question that some people have: is it a fad or is it a movement? That it seems to be it's a buzzword right now, and we'll see. Time will see if it has legs. But I think that there is a real value to this construction technique and this technology as a supplement to how we also need to build to move forward in an environmentally sustainable method. So I think with a little more exposure, once people can get in and walk through the STEM building, I think that will spur this as a viable option to other owners. And then that'll lead to the next building, which will lead to the next building, which will lead to the next building. But I think the experience, because it's gone well, I think in my perspective at Michigan State, which was a risk for the university to take on such a large project, to go with something they're not familiar with, that it'll make people a little less gun shy to go this direction in the future. And I think it'll be word of mouth, and it'll just be the codes catching up to the technology and contractors catching up to the ability of doing this work that will propel this forward.
Excellent, thank you. So we've got just a couple of minutes. I didn't know if there was anything any of you wanted to, if you have questions for each other, if there's any last thoughts that you might have as we get ready to round this one out and send it back to Donna LaCourte to finish out our morning session. Do you have any final parting thoughts? It's been a long 3 half-day sessions, I will say that. This has been a learning experience for all of us. We have, as far as I'm concerned, we have performed like rock stars throughout this. It has been an interesting platform. I'm sure for somebody like George Berghorn, who is probably teaching using remote technology, this may not have been a big stretch. For the rest of us, it felt like a pretty big stretch, I think. So thank you all so much for being here. We do appreciate it. We are going to go ahead and turn our cameras off and let Donna LaCourte take it back away. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for the great questions and feedback. It will truly inform next steps for us as a state to move forward with developing mass timber markets and manufacturing opportunities. As we conclude our Q&A, I just wouldn't want to leave without giving our panel and moderator a virtual round of applause. So thank you very much. So now we'll move to our closing remarks. And I would like to introduce two of our leaders that have been influential in bringing this summit to fruition to offer their thoughts. Shannon and Brian, as you're introduced, please turn on your cameras and leave them on until all the introductions are complete. Shannon Lott has a bachelor's in wildlife biology from Grand Valley State University and a master's in forestry from Michigan State University. She studied forest health issues and in particular did research on beech bark disease in the eastern Upper Peninsula. She has worked for the Department of Natural Resources for over 23 years, 20 of which were in the Wildlife Division, and a little under 2 years as the Forest Resources Division Assistant Chief. In the spring of 2019, she transitioned to the Executive Office as the Natural Resources Deputy for the department. Shannon has worked extensively with complex stakeholders, legislators, and the Natural Resource Commission on law, regulations, policy, and programs for the division and department during her career. She enjoys working with teams of people to solve natural resource issues. And I'd also have the pleasure of introducing educator architect Brian Craig. He has built on his global service to humanity and award-winning architectural practice to create a new accredited professional Master of Architecture program and educate a new generation of architectural leaders. Elevated to AIA Fellowship for his work as an architectural education and practice, Brian recently retired from his position as founding director of the Master of Architect program at Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Building on a career that spans from the Peace Corps in Afghanistan to senior vice president at Progressive AE, Brian designed and led the implementation of the CAD MARC, engaging students, faculty, and professionals in the pursuit of architecture deeply rooted in a sense of place and community. Brian now returns to architectural research and consulting. Brian holds a Bachelor's of Science in Architecture and Master of Architecture degrees from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He's an avid sailor and spends as much time as he can enjoy travel and the beauty of Michigan. And we're very pleased to have him as our current chair of MIFB. Thanks to both of you. Shannon, please kick off the closing remarks.
Thank you, Donna. Wow, what a great array of 3 days that we had with all of the fabulous speakers that were so prepared for this. I was afraid a year ago when we were trying to put this together and that once it switched virtually, that we would lose speakers and we would lose attendees because of the virtual format. But I think for all of you that hung in there, this has been just a really, really great learning experience, at least for me. And the complexities of mass timber really showed through in this. However, I think that it is doable. And I think that many of you on here will now have connections that you didn't have before. And those folks obviously are all in our attendee list. And then a lot of that is on the MIFB website too, as all the partners and sponsors that helped in this endeavor. So having said that, I wanted to say that a lot of what I was going to say was actually covered in the opportunities and barriers section here at the last panel. I was going to give my big plug for trying to have a CLT manufacturer come to Michigan. I still want that. I know that Michigan obviously is a lot of hardwood species versus softwood. We are 69% hardwood here in Michigan, but as George said, I think that we can work on how we can expand the use of mass timber in the hardwood species as well. So that would be one of my big goals for Michigan and for our agency, is to help the forest products industry attract a CLT manufacturer here, or to have some of our folks that are housed here already to endeavor in that new realm. And that will also help. That led me into the carbon conversation I was going to talk about, with some of those carbon goals you saw come out from the administration recently. And I believe there was a question on that in the final panel as well. We are really going to help in that conversation if we propel this mass timber conversation forward. We are also, as an agency for DNR, we are working on the selling of carbon credits, and our forest products industry knows that. We've really been transparent about how we're doing that on a pilot project basis, and trying to propel into that realm as well, and helping in the carbon conversation as much as we can. And as you know, Michigan is heavily forested, over 20 million acres of forest here, a lot of private forests, but also industrial, and our state forest system, which is the largest east of the Mississippi here. So having that in the back of your mind, I also want to say that we are going to try to solicit contractors and all of you, many of you that have been on this summit, because the governor's budget that came out, hopefully most of you saw that that was finalized and signed. The Newberry mass timber building was approved in that budget line item, one of the budget line items for our department. So that is a huge, huge deal. We did not know if that line item would make it through in this budget, and it did. So we are in the design phases of that Newberry building, and that again is a customer service center for the DNR in the Newberry, right next to where the old Newberry office is. So that's going to be the location in the East UP. The whole goal for that building was to have it be a showcase for the forest products industry in Michigan, and a showcase for mass timber and carbon storage and all those things that go along with the carbon conversation. We were going to try to meld all that together. We are also going to look at using universities to help in that design. We have talked to Michigan Tech, and I have worked with MIFB, Brian Craig. He might talk a little bit about this too. And I know George has students that also work on mass timber design. And so we're going to try to have universities also help in partial design for that building, so that we can incorporate a lot of those folks into one of probably one of the biggest mass timber buildings in Michigan. Not as big as Michigan State's, but I'm not sure how the Michigan Tech one will compare to this, but it will be a great showcase. It's on the road to Tequamanon Falls. If any of you know Michigan's Upper Peninsula, that's one of our most visited falls, and it will be an awesome showcase piece. So I'm really, really excited to hopefully put that RFP out soon on the design of that building, and work with contractors and manufacturers that really want to get their feet wet in mass timber. So this will be a great opportunity for that. And then I just wanted to say thank you to our partners once again. And I know Brian's probably going to hit on this, but this is just the beginning. So we wanted to launch this summit in partnership with a lot of the agencies and with the forest products industry. We've had several people on our committee from all walks of the forest products industry to help with this. And so we want this to be propelling of mass timber in the state of Michigan. We don't want this to be the end conversation. We want it to be the beginning. And I hope all of you have seen that, and many of you have talked in that as well, but you know this is just the beginning. We have the outreach position with Michigan State that will help and try to have this conversation with more and more people, and that sort of educational piece, again, that the panel talked about at the end here. So this is just the beginning. We're super excited. Our team's going to have some follow-up meetings to this, and there will be some leftover funding from this virtual summit that we will use to propel this conversation in Michigan. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you again for all your participation, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Well, thank you, Shannon. Yeah, thank you. And yay about Newberry. That's very cool. I love the contrast and the breadth of our background images between the two of us as we make our comments here. And it shows the breadth of the enterprise that timber is in Michigan. So yeah, what a journey this has been. 3 weeks. And over these last 3 weeks, we've explored mass timber design, construction, delivery. We've gone from why to how. And as we said 3 weeks ago when we began, it's complicated. It's complicated. Diverse teams, high level of collaboration, high level of communication, integration to do really good stuff. You know, we really, really, Shannon, value this partner and all. We value this partnership with DNR. And we also hope this may be the first of a series. You know, resources generated by this conference will help fund future education efforts in mass timber in Michigan. And we're already discussing the possibility of future programs, collaborations with DNR, other partners on this summit. For example, and Professor Berghorn mentioned, and actually he and I have been working together on a national student competition, as he mentioned. And I echo his call for interest in a competition in which the student teams reflect the breadth and depth of abilities we've seen in these past weeks. And you know, that's one. But the success of mass timber in Michigan depends on all of us. I encourage you to work together, to collaborate with the networks you bring and those that may have grown through the summit. Follow up on the ideas generated, particularly as we've come to these closing thoughts about barriers and opportunities, particularly next steps that may come from that. And finally, we do this for the generations that will follow as much as we do it for ourselves. And I think something that all of us on this conference have in common is that we all desire to create places that enrich and embrace those who use them. And we want to do it in a way that leaves Michigan better than we found it. So with that, I'd like to just go through that slide deck one more time and thank all the sponsors who've been part of making this happen. But first, starting with the steering committee, and really starting with Shannon Lott of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, because she has been the driver, sometimes cajoler, pusher, the visionary, and the convener who has brought this together and made it happen. So Shannon, thank you. And it's been both great fun and a learning experience. Others involved on the steering committee includes George Berghorn of Michigan State University, Rich Bowman of the Nature Conservancy and Timber Advisory Council, Kim Giddicke, Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, Brenda Haskell, who you've met actually many of these people you've met several times, because this is a working steering committee. Brenda Haskell of Michigan DNR, Kathy Klecker of Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Rich Kobe of Michigan State University, Bill Cordenbrock of Michigan Technological University, Donna LaCourte of the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and thank you today, Donna, for a fabulous hosting job. Keith Lambert of the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, Archie Landerman of Woodworks and the Wood Products Council, Julie Manley. Thank you, Julie, for being the force behind that people are not seeing, except occasionally, but are not seeing, you're the person making this happen, so thank you. Dave Newman of Michigan Department of Natural Resources, Denise Pellerito of the Michigan Association of Timbermen, Scott Robbins of the Michigan Forest Products Council, Mark Rudnicki of Michigan Tech, Kevin Sellmeyer of Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, and Eric Scheffler of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Again, the breadth and depth of the conversation that we need to be having. So next slide. And of course, we together, MIFPE and the Michigan DNR are hosting. Keep going. But we particularly want to thank our gold sponsors, all of whom have not only been sponsors in monetary terms, in kind, but also have been sponsors as participants and supporters of the work of putting this together. Granger Construction, Mass Timber at Michigan State University, and the Nature Conservancy. Next. And our silver sponsors, SDI Structures, JML Forestry, and Sanson, and our bronze sponsor, the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. And finally, our exhibitors and media partners, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Chrisman Company, Chrisman Constructors, the Mass Timber Institute, WTA Architects, IDS, Integrated Design Solutions, and Element 5. So again, thank you all. Just one quick reminder in closing, a survey will be distributed immediately following the event today. It'll take 2 minutes or less of your time, and we really appreciate your feedback, which will help us assess the event and plan for the future. So, with that, on behalf of the Michigan Forest Biomaterials Institute, MIFPE, and our co-host, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, DNR, thank you. Be safe, and if your travels take you elsewhere from today, travel well. We look forward to being together in the future. Goodbye.